question is he the strongest to win the election? I don't know that answer, but can anybody beat Biden? Yeah, anybody can beat Biden. Can Biden beat other people? Yes, Biden can beat him.
Welcome back to America Decides. There is more reaction tonight, that's putting it mildly, to House Speaker Kevin McCarthy's equivocal comments about whether or not Donald Trump, the former president, is the Republicans' best choice in 2024. Former House Speaker Paul Ryan, also a Republican, went on CNBC Wednesday morning and was asked his thoughts.
So I don't have that job anymore. So I'm very clear with, look, it's a disaster if we nominate Trump. You know, I think that I've been saying this for a long time. But Liz is right, which is he could win. I think we lose with him. I think we're much more likely to lose. We haven't won anything with him since he first won in 2016.
Speaker Ryan was referring to Liz Cheney, who made remarks about the former president, saying he could win the Republican nomination. For more on all this, CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane joins us now. Scott, the big question is, it's clearly a riff. The former president's campaign is not happy about any equivocation from Speaker McCarthy about the political potency of Trump in any venue, at any time, at any hour of any day. McCarthy's tried to walk it back. Is this a teeny moment or a possibly bigger moment?
He's really flooding the zone, isn't he? Kevin McCarthy's just saying more rather than saying, you know, I withdraw those remarks. Let me say something different now. He's told another interviewer that Trump is now stronger than he was in 2016, trying to balancing out his equivocation from earlier. Here's the bottom line. When he returns to Washington after next week's recess, Kevin McCarthy is returning to a narrow Republican majority with some ardent Trump supporters in that faction of House Freedom Caucus members. And he has got to flood the zone or allow them to flood the zone with impeachment expungement resolutions to support Trump, impeachment resolutions against members of the Biden administration to try to counterbalance, and efforts to continue to criticize, if not villainize, those who've gone after President Trump in the past, including Adam Schiff. At remarks in Ohio today with other House Republicans, listen to what the House Speaker had to say about Adam Schiff.
Our message to the committee is this is not a place for partisanship. This is a place to make sure America is safe for the future. Look at what our adversaries are doing. Look where the investment needs to be made. There was mistakes by the past leader of that committee. We watched that committee miss from Afghanistan and other. They were more focused on partisan political maneuvers. And you've got to understand, coming in as chairman after that time, after what Adam Schiff has broken that committee, was a really difficult task. But look at what transpired from there.
Really priming the pump with some of his Freedom Caucus members there. He speaks again tomorrow in Columbiana County, Ohio, a bastion of Trump supporters. Let's see if he goes another step and says more about the former president.
Scott, there's an assumption, and I'm not sure if it's well grounded in reality, that if former President Trump were to flip some switch, he could jeopardize the standing of Speaker McCarthy. Is that really true?
Feels like the breakaway caucus of House Freedom Caucus members, those who didn't come over and vote for Kevin McCarthy at all to be Speaker, those who were most strident in their opposition to that debt ceiling compromise, have the capacity to galvanize others, but not a critical mass, not by the dozens, not people outside the Freedom Caucus. It's unclear how they could use their leverage to oust Kevin McCarthy, even if Donald Trump said to do so. We haven't seen evidence of that yet, but we can tell, Major, they are restive. They have Trump on their minds, and they have been unequivocal about that.
So you talked about impeachment, either expungement or impeaching people in the Biden administration. Is there any governing that's going to go on in the month of July that we should keep our eye on?
The House will pass resolutions. They will pass bills that may stand no chance in the U.S. Senate, but they will do some legislating. They just won't do any lawmaking. Nothing seems to be coming down the pike that senators and House members will easily agree upon. They will move to try more impeachments. Marjorie Taylor Greene told us that she's going to move on Merrick Garland, who, by the way, will appear September 20th before the House Judiciary Committee to answer their questions. They're going to try to move on the U.S. Attorney in the District of Columbia, the Homeland Security Secretary, the FBI Director, ultimately on President Biden. It's a matter of when, not if, they'll try. Whether it gets to a vote on the House floor, that's a little less clear.
Also, they have to pass appropriations bills. And as I see in my email, certain progressive groups are saying there are riders on those appropriations bills that could gum up the works and make the prospect of a government shutdown at least something worth keeping an eye on.
more likely than not at this point, the prospect of a government shutdown. The House and Senate are speaking two different languages when it comes to spending bills. The House wants to cut it back to 2022 levels. Senators want to more robustly fund things. Look for this over the next 48 hours, Major. I'm told, look for Democrats to make an issue over FAA funding. The FAA administrator warned during an appropriations hearing a couple months ago there was going to be this type of chaos in the skies this week or some week in the future because of staffing issues and funding issues. For Democrats to make that an issue as they fight for funding bills over the next few weeks.
Funding that must be appropriated, therefore approved by Congress. Scott MacFarlane, as always, we thank you.